Shalom and welcome to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and asking you a question. What would you do if your life was radically changed and you lost the ability to get up, walk around, use your hands, use your feet? How would you respond? Would you respond in despair and blame God and be angry? Or would you be like our next guest, David Kline, who was the All-American kid, who excelled in sports, achieved honor roll each year, led community theater, sang in the top choir, and was elected to student government? And all that changed for him on a beautiful summer day in 1987 when a diving accident left him paralyzed. David went on to earn a teaching degree, taught high school English, speech and debate, and coached soccer. He lives in the foothills of California, and here to talk about his new book, Walk by Faith, is David Kline. David, welcome to Revealing the Truth.
Good morning. Thank you for having me.
David, we are honored and humbled that you are truly the living example of being an overcomer by the word of your testimony and the blood of the Lamb. Your story, not dissimilar to that of the late, great Charles Krauthammer, who had a diving accident in his, I believe, freshman year of college and went on to finish and get his, become an MD, a psychiatrist, and lived a full life. Your story is similar in the fact that you had a diving accident that left you a quadriplegic, but there was something different about your approach, your attitude, your walk that equipped you and enabled you to not curse God, not that Charles ever did, but to embrace the fullness of everything that God had for you in this season. Where did that begin? Where did all that start? Where was that seed of faith planted in you that at 17 you could face this debilitating situation with such grace, with such faith, with such hope?
Well, first of all, I thank God every day that He grabbed a hold of me as a young boy. I was 5 years old when I gave my life to Jesus, and I'm just thankful that he got a hold of me so young. So I grew up in a Christian home and Christian schools and going to church. I was a good kid, good Christian boy, but this accident certainly was the first test of my faith. There were no baby steps of testing my faith. I got one big wallop of breaking my neck, but from the very beginning, God was there, and I think He gave me extra faith because I was certainly challenged facing a lifetime of paralysis.
David, you talk about God giving you an extra measure of faith, that in the midst of what we would consider to be the greatest tribulation, and maybe for some like Job, that which we feared the most has come to pass, that none of us want to be where you are. But I don't want to be in that chair, but I want to be in your heart. I want to be walking alongside of you in faith, because I know that you are dancing in faith, that you are jumping, leaping, in faith, but yet you're confined to a wheelchair. How does that happen?
That's a good question. Well, I know God does promise that He'll provide for our needs, and I know that He provides faith and trust for me every day. That doesn't mean every day is easy. There are certainly ups and downs, but constantly relying on God's promise. He's never failed on His promises, and I believe Him, and I believe that God is a big God. And from the very first moment after my injury, I believed this happened for a reason. Friends and family would tell me this happened for a reason, but I was already thinking there's got to be a reason. I don't know what it is, but I just have to trust that God knows, and He sees my whole life. He sees what's ahead, and He's got a plan for me and for this. But it's not easy, but it's constantly being in prayer every day, relying on God's promises.
David, you talk about God's promises. Did you feel at any point in time that God was setting you apart? When we look at the life of Noah, we look at the life of Abraham, we look at the life of Elijah, we look at the life of those who God truly called to be set apart and put through great trials, great tribulations, but God wanted 100% of them because He had such an amazing plan for them that until He could get them alone, not distracted with the all-American, not distracted with the accomplishment, not distracted with what we would call the idols, but God would love you so much that He had such a great purpose for you that this was a way to get you just for Himself, where it was just you and Him, so that your purpose could be fulfilled, and it had to be in this particular way. Not the way you would choose, but do you see it through that lens?
Well, that's interesting that you bring that up. Many years ago, so many years ago that I don't even remember who told me this, but someone told me that there's a chance that maybe God knew that someone on this planet needed to hear the gospel, and the only person that this person would hear from would be someone in my condition. And maybe God knew that I was the person who could deal with it or trust Him through this, and that's why God chose me just to be a minister in this position. And before my accident, I thought God would use me through sports. I was playing soccer, and I was envisioning being on a ministry sort of soccer team. But God had other plans and wanted to use me in different ways. And I think that's something we all have to be open to if we really believe God is who He says He is, and if we really trust Him.
In the beginning of this journey, you have this accident. You're lying there. Are you conscious or unconscious at this point?
I was conscious. Yeah, most people do go unconscious. And in that instant, underwater, after I had hit my head, somehow I knew I was paralyzed. Maybe I knew that because I had already read Johnny Erickson's book, and I knew that if you dive wrong and hit your head, you might end up in a wheelchair. So I knew something serious had happened. And in that instant, my first thought was, well, God will heal me. And I don't know if that thought was from God. I don't know if it was my brain in denial. But either way, it put me at peace. And I just was at peace through this whole ordeal, from instantly breaking my neck to the ambulance ride to the hospital. I was at peace, just trusting God somehow through that.
It's almost surreal to hear you talk about it this way, because I know that in the natural, that as we try on your garment right now, we would say that we would be riddled with fear or trepidation or shaking our fist at God, why me? Here you are, your family's notified. What's their response, and how do you respond to them in this bubble of supernatural strength and confidence and hope, even from the moment it occurred?
Yes, my parents found out from phone calls. I was already en route to the hospital when they were getting phone calls. So that's probably a phone call no parent ever wants to receive. But my mom, she entered the hospital, and her first view of me was me on my back with machines and tubes and all the beeping, and she was very scared. But I said, "Hi, Mom," and that just put her at ease. She knew that I was still me. I still had my brain and thinking capacity, and they knew my faith. They knew that I was trusting God through this.
How long were you hospitalized?
Well, my condition got very bad in intensive care. I flatlined 3 times. I had double pneumonia. So I was in intensive care for 3 weeks, and then suddenly got improving very quickly and was in the hospital for 2 more weeks before I was then sent off to physical rehab for 3 months. So it was a long period of time, a long period to not have planned to be gone for, but it was just something I had to go through.
During this time, what would you describe your prayer life, your discussions about the Lord? Did you find yourself put in a position of what we might call divine appointments, or was this really just a season of dealing with this spinal cord injury that left you as a quadriplegic?
Well, there in the hospital, I certainly was praying a lot, and family and friends would come in and pray with me. But I even started asking my nurses and doctors to pray with me, and many of them would. Yeah, I think that was really a neat experience to be able to pray with my spinal surgeon. So my faith was tested but strengthened during this time.
So did you have spinal cord surgery? Did you have any kind of trying to repair any of this spinal cord injury?
Yes, I broke my fifth cervical. That's the fifth bone in my neck. I crushed it to bits. I must have hit my head so hard on the sand that it was crushed to bits. So the way they repair that, they took a chip of bone off my hip and placed it in the space of the fifth cervical and wired it and fused it to the strong and healthy bone above and below it. As far as the nerve damage, there's nothing they can do. Scientists don't know how to repair spinal cord nerves yet. That's why these injuries are so lifelong typically.
So this is the Christopher Reeves kind of situation where he had that spinal cord injury and left him in the same condition. One of the more well-known stories that are out there, opening up a lot of debates about stem cell and a lot of controversial issues about stem cell research and stem cell or any kind of regenerative laboratory induced or created. When you look at man's offering for solutions, and I'm sure you stay on top of things as they develop, as you would. It would be natural to be believing for healing of some kind, and God does use doctors, God does use scientists, God uses all things. Romans 8:28 is pretty clear that all things work together for good for those who love Him and are called according to His purpose. How much of your time or energy is spent in looking at that, or what is your life like and what are you doing with it to support and build the kingdom?
Well, it's interesting that you bring up different science technologies and even healing. This whole time I believed God can heal me or anyone. And as I explained in the book, there was a time about a year after my accident when someone came across a flyer that there was going to be a Christian healer in my neighborhood. And so I was planning on going to see this healer. And I told my mom about it, and she suddenly exclaimed, he held you, this healer, when you were a baby. So I thought, boy, there's some connection. Maybe I will be healed. And I had it all planned out. On this particular day, I would go see this healer, and then I might be walking home. And then somehow I got the day wrong on the calendar, and I missed it. And so I thought, well, okay, I guess it wasn't meant to be. And over the years, I would sometimes look at new technologies, as you mentioned, stem cell therapy, which it has some promises, but I do not spend much of my time thinking about it. I know some people who have spinal cord injuries who that is their whole focus every day is new technologies and surgeries. But for me, it's been primarily working, being used by God however He wishes, And for 20 years, that was being a high school English teacher. So that's where I put most of my focus each day.
You wrote in the book that during this period of time, so many things were being done to your body, you had no control or say over them. And there was fear, a certain amount of fear and uncertainty. Faith is wonderful, but we say that fear is the absence of faith. I don't necessarily agree with that. I think that there's a balance we strike where we're fearful but believing, we're hopeful yet realistic. We have to strike a balance in our understanding. What were your thought processes going through many of these procedures, and what were you being told, and who is really in charge?
Well, as I mentioned earlier, I had never really had an injury before. This was my first injury, and it was a big one. And so I was unfamiliar with hospitals and certainly unfamiliar with spinal cord injuries. But I did feel like many of the nurses and doctors never did tell me what they were doing. They would just start doing things. And there was poking and prodding. And I just had to just assume these professionals know what they're doing. And maybe, again, that was God just giving me a peace, because I just thought, okay, this nurse hopefully knows what she's doing. This must be something my body needs to have done. So I'm just going to go along with it. Like as I explain in the book, the first time I was aware of a catheter to drain my bladder, the nurse didn't tell me what she was doing, and I saw all this red stuff on her hands, and I thought, gosh, is that blood? And I was somewhat horrified. And I thought, gosh, this must be the way catheters are. But then I later learned it was just iodine. So if she had just told me that, that would have put me a little bit at ease. But I just had a peace through this whole thing, and just trusted the professionals and trusted God.
I love your faith. I love your strength. But it would only be natural to have an emotionally impactful aspect to this shattered dreams, shattered neck, shattered life, that there had to be times when you had emotional, soulish level kind of responses. How did you process? What was it that you did? Did you honor the fear? Did you honor the unknown? Did you, how did you approach the natural reactions? You weren't immune to them.
Right.
So they had to have occurred.
In the hospital, the staff sent in a psychiatrist to counsel me. I think it's something they do with every spinal cord patient. And the psychiatrist told me the steps I would go through. He said, you're going to go through anger. You're going to go through denial. And I had already thought about those things. And I never did go through anger. I wasn't mad at myself, because my dive, I didn't do anything stupid. I didn't jump off rocks or bridges. My dive was just something simple. All I did was, at a beach, run into the water until it felt deep enough to just dive in. And somehow I did it completely wrong to hit my head on the sand. So I didn't do anything wrong. I wasn't mad at God. I felt I can't be angry at God because he's God and he knows what he's doing. I think I did go through some denial. When I was in the hospital, someone introduced a book to me and a movie called The Miracle Man, about someone who had broken his neck, and 6 months later or 9 months later, he was walking. So I thought, okay, I could do that. So I started giving myself, I thought, okay, I'll be generous and conservative. I'll give myself a year. So I was even thinking, a year from now, I'm going to walk down at my graduation or at senior ball, and I'll surprise everybody. And So that's got to be probably some denial on my part. And maybe that lasted a year or two, I think, before it really settled in that, okay, this is going to be permanent and this is my life. So there probably was some denial, but no anger. People have asked if I thought about ending it all. I've known people who have told me, I wouldn't want to live if I had an injury like yours. And I can think of one time when I did consider it, not even really consider it, but it crossed my mind. I was at the top of a staircase in my wheelchair, and I thought I could just wheel right down this staircase. And then I kind of cracked myself up because I thought, well, then I'd probably just end up breaking my neck at the bottom of the stairs.
Right.
And so that kind of made me laugh, and that was about as far as I went with that thought.
Did you find that people were uncomfortable in figuring out how to say the right thing, or that people struggled with knowing what to say? There's no real handbook for walking into a young 17-year-old's room who's been given news that his neck has been broken and that he could face permanent paralysis for the rest of his life. There's no handbook for the top best things to say in this situation. Where did you find comfort, and were there some comical things that were said that now that you look back on them, that kind of make you laugh and chuckle, that people were that much, either that clueless or just really had no idea what they were contending with?
Well, from the very beginning, first of all, my friends and family were great. They visited me constantly in the hospital and very supportive. I don't think they were awkward. I've heard later that some of them were pretty scared for me, but they kept that pretty hidden. I did have a nurse once that I thought this was funny. She couldn't believe that I couldn't move my fingers, and she thought I maybe wasn't trying hard enough. And I was shocked that this professional in healthcare didn't quite understand spinal cord injuries to understand that I don't have any movement in my fingers. And certainly I would have tried by then. She was not the one to enlighten me to tell me to try. I had tried. But most people are pretty good. I've had, as I mentioned, one person who told me that he wouldn't want to live as a quadriplegic. I thought that was kind of a strange thing to say to a quadriplegic. But most people have been good and supportive, and there weren't very many awkward situations like that.
Well, I'm glad to hear that. Now,
Yeah.
We're going to take a short break. We're talking with David Kline, author of the newly released book, Walk by Faith. David is a quadriplegic, wheelchair-bound, who has lived an amazing life as a teacher, coach, and now I believe you devote your time to speaking and to writing and to getting the message out about the grace of God, the mercy of God, and the goodness of God, that in the midst of your trial, the midst of your tribulation, you're giving glory and honor to God when others who have a broken wrist or carpal tunnel syndrome or a sprained ankle have been cursing God. Here you are, unable to walk, unable to use your arms or your legs, requiring 24-hour-a-day, 7-day-a-week caregiving, and you are out there talking about the goodness and the greatness of God. I'm touched, I'm moved, I know our audience is, and I encourage you to visit our Books and Media page and order a copy of Walk by Faith for yourself. We're going to take a short break and we'll be right back. Shalom. I'm the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, Executive Director of Igniting a Nation and host of the daily TV program Revealing the Truth, seen live every Monday through Friday from 9 a.m. to 1 p.m. Central Standard Time at www.ianbn.com, and then replayed throughout the day and night via our website. All of our segments can be seen on the Igniting a Nation YouTube channel. Since our launch in January of this year, we've expanded our global reach to over 54 countries with a social media following of over 125,000. Our commitment is to bring you the most in-depth interviews with authors, subject matter experts, and thought leaders from around the world. We have interviewed guests from Israel, Brazil, England, India, and all across North America. All of our authors are featured on the Books and Media page on our website, www.ianbn.com. There you can find a direct link to the book you want to order, and we receive a small commission directly from Amazon. There is no cost to you for this service. In addition to our daily teachings and interviews, we make available to you the archive of all of the interviews on our YouTube, Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram channels. Our live program is available from our homepage, and there is never a charge to you for any of this access. We made the decision long ago that we would remain a commercial-free resource that would not be influenced by any pressure from any outside company. There are only two ways that we are able to continue to operate this ministry and provide you with the only live 4-hour daily Christian television talk show program. The first is through your support and tax-deductible contributions to Igniting a Nation. These can be made directly through the donate button on the website or sent through the mail to Igniting a Nation, 2700 Corporate Drive, Suite 120, Birmingham, Alabama, 35242. The other way we support the program is by offering you a unique opportunity to have access to over 10 years worth of teachings on a subscription basis. The teaching archives contains all of my prior sermons, Torah studies, prophecy in the news videos, and much more for the low subscription price of $5 per month. This subscription grants you unlimited access to over 800 hours of content not available elsewhere and is updated weekly with the most current prophecy classes. In addition to 20 hours of original TV programming each weekday, we invite you to join us live every Monday, Tuesday, and Thursday evenings for our Prophecy in the News classes. The times and locations are listed on our events page on the website www.ianbn.com. Every day, you and I are faced with the challenge of where we will go to hear the truth. We are committed to bring you the only program of its kind that covers the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. We cannot do this without your support. Since we launched on January 5th, 2017, we have aired over 300 individual teachings, interviews, and commentaries not available anywhere else. We are now working side by side with almost every major Christian publishing house to bring you the most in-depth feature interviews possible. Our 1-hour features address every subject that affects the believer's life. We are hearing of salvations from the Middle East, Africa, and all across the United States. Lives are being changed every day, and we have only just begun. Our mission is to become your trusted resource and grant you access to the people, tools, and information you need to grow in your relationship with the Lord. You can help us by liking us on social media and through your financial support. We know you have many choices in who you support, but we are prayerfully asking you to consider helping us keep revealing the truth, true to our calling, to cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth like no other program available. Donate today and help us bring the message to the four corners of the earth. Visit www.ianbn.com and donate, buy a book, or subscribe to our teaching archives. Without you, we do not. Shalom and welcome back to this edition of Revealing the Truth, where we cover the headlines, the heartlines, and biblical truth. I'm your host, the Reverend Rabbi Eric Walker, and we're talking with David Kline, author of Walk by Faith, the story of the journey of a young 17-year-old who has a diving accident, a life-threatening but yet livable breaking of his neck, causing him to be a quadriplegic and confined to a wheelchair and requiring 24-hour day, 7-day-a-week caregiving for the last 31 years. Yet, during that period of time, he spent 20 years teaching school, coaching, and living a very active and vibrant life. And now he's out speaking and sharing his story, Walk by Faith, about how good God is. And the question for you is, if you found yourself in the same position, would you be praising God like David Kline? Would you have this positive attitude like David Kline? Would you be giving praise and glory to God even in the storm and the ongoing tribulation of facing the challenges of being a quadriplegic? David Kline, welcome back to Revealing the Truth.
Thank you, Eric.
David, caregiving is a challenge, and you, during your period of time when you were kind of under medical insurance care and Medicaid or county or state assistance, there were provisions made for you, but there was a time you were released from all that, and the aspect of finding caregivers was solely on your shoulders.
Yes, in fact, actually, the whole time it's been on my shoulders. I would advertise in the paper for caregivers and interview them myself, and found out that anyone can be nice in an interview, and it can be certainly different a week later.
Well, you certainly have had some experiences that you shared in the book. I'll put it under the category of drug addicts, alcoholics, and thieves. Share with us some of the pitfalls of picking the wrong caregiver.
Yeah, I've got a lot of experience with that. Early on, I would have live-in caregivers. That was the only way I could really afford it, offering a small salary and room and board. So I would have one caregiver exclusively for all my care, and I rely on my caregiver for everything. So just think about all the things you do for yourself in a day. I need someone to help me with all those things. So I rely completely. My life is in their hands. And I've had caregivers who are trying to help me while high on drugs or drunk or passed out. And that's a difficult thing, relying on someone like that. As I say in the book, there was a time where I had one caregiver who was constantly drunk and getting high on drugs. And I just remember once sitting in the shower, water pouring over me, and I was just singing a song, just, God, give me strength, give me hope, give me peace, help me get through this. I've had caregivers who stole from me, a caregiver who forged my checks. So that particular story, that's in the book. I had to pretend that I didn't know he was stealing from me while I was investigating and having the police investigate. And so there was about a week period of time where I had to just be nice and happy with this caregiver, knowing that in about a week he's going to be arrested, and then I would need a new caregiver to take his place because he was the only one helping me at the time. So that's been a huge struggle and challenge that many people maybe don't even know would be a challenge. They think, someone in a wheelchair, all they're dealing with is they can't walk. Well, there's a lot of other issues, and one of them certainly is caregiving.
How has the response from your faith family been? You have natural support from your natural family. Your mother and father still living?
Yes.
Okay. You have brothers and sisters?
Yes.
And so they're actively involved in your life and spend time with you. What about your church family? I'm sure, as you mentioned in the beginning, you had many people come and pray with you and pray for you. We're 31 years into this. Is that something that's tapered off, or is that something that's been consistent in your life?
It's probably maybe some of the support may have tapered off somewhat, but I still fellowship with some of the same people I did 31 years ago. I live in a small town, so I know a lot of the people here in this town, and the way I get to church is from someone at church coming over to pick me up and driving me to church in my van. So they're still supportive, and it's nice having this deep connection for so many years with my pastor and other people at church.
Well, that's wonderful to know that there's been continuity, and small town worked to your advantage. Imagine being in Los Angeles or New York City and having to face some of these challenges. Now, over time, the challenges don't go away. You've certainly been able to improve. You have use of your arms. You can lift your arms. You just don't have the ability to use your hands other than through mastering of grasping, but your manual dexterity is gone.
Correct. Correct. It makes most things difficult. I do have a brace on my hand where I could put a pen to help me write. The way I type is using the outside knuckle of my left hand. I type one key at a time. I type my entire book that way, one key at a time. So it takes a lot of work and effort, but a lot of things are doable. I'm grateful for technology like this, that I could use a computer and internet.
So, what new challenges do you face? Here, you're 31 years into this. Is your faith stronger than it was at the beginning? Is it the same as it was at the beginning? What are the lessons, the biblical lessons that you've been able to really take ownership of that have helped shape your message that you're now bringing out to the world?
Well, you in fact mentioned earlier my favorite Bible verse, and that's Romans 8:28. And from the very beginning, I have really clung to that because I believe God, I believe what he says, and Romans 8:28 is a promise that all things will work together for good. So I have clung to that. And in my book, I talk about that verse. And when God says everything works out together for good, it's not necessarily the good that, oh, I'm going to be healed, or good that I'm going to be rich. It's good in God's eyes, which I think is an eternal perspective. It might mean forgiveness. It might mean peace. It might mean salvation for someone. So that's a verse I have clung to because that's a promise from God. And I would say through this whole process, my faith has gotten stronger. I have had to trust God through many things, and he's gotten me through everything. There's been mountains and valleys, but I've trusted him through all of this.
Are there new challenges that you face as you grow older? You know, the 17-year-old body and the 48-year-old body are different.
Right.
And as you age, the body begins to change. So are there new challenges you're facing now that you had not faced before? And are you facing them with the same faith, more faith? How are you approaching it? And how do you really view it?
One of my greatest physical challenges is avoiding pressure sores on my bottom. Early after my accident, I was not up to date or keen on checking my skin daily or knowing all the nuances of my skin, and I did get a pressure sore. That kept me in bed for a month. And then a second time that happened when I was in college, got another one where I was stuck in bed for a month. So one of the ways to avoid this for people in wheelchairs, my wheelchair can recline, it can tilt way back, so I can take the pressure off my bottom for about 10 minutes. So for the first 10, 15 years after my accident, every 2 hours I would tilt for 10 minutes. But then after 15 years, I had to start tilting every 1 hour because my bottom, I guess my skin was, I guess it gets thinner as we get older. So for many, many years, I would recline every 1 hour. And then a few years ago, I had to start tilting every half hour. And I would have to get different cushions, more effective cushions. One cushion that used to work no longer is soft enough for my skin. So I'm always looking at the clock, always thinking, okay, I need to tilt in 5 minutes, or this cushion isn't working out, I need to find a new cushion. Or I might just get into bed one night and check my skin, and my skin's red, and so then I have to spend the next day or two in bed. So that's always an issue and always on my mind. My health is something I have to be so diligent and disciplined about. Drinking enough water for my bladder and kidneys, or taking enough supplements or eating well. So there's a lot to the physical aspect of this, and always some new challenges.
Now, you mentioned a van. Are you able to drive, or someone must drive the van for you?
It's not equipped for me to drive. I am able. Many years ago, I test drove a van where it used a two-handed system to drive. It's an expensive modification, and even if I did get that modification, I might be kind of hesitant to drive. Sometimes I kind of need to hold on to things for balance in the van, or sometimes I might have a muscle spasm. I'd hate to be driving 60 miles an hour down the freeway and have a muscle spasm in my arm, but my van is equipped for me to wheel up and park in the van, and anyone is able to drive it. So that's how I get around.
Are you now spending your time, you're no longer teaching, is that correct?
I retired from teaching about 2 years ago.
Okay, and how are you devoting your time? Now, you've written the book. That took you a period of over a year of, the hunt and peck method of typing, and I just commend you for the fortitude and the diligence and the discipline to decide you were going to do it yourself, that you didn't do it through a voice, which you could have dictated it, and voice to word. You chose to pound it out, really taking ownership of every letter that is in the book is authored and owned by you. So how are you using your time now? What are you using for the Lord? And what is your hope for the book?
Well, right now from home, I manage a couple businesses during the day. And again, that's due to the internet and great technology that I'm able to do that. And as you said, I spend a lot of time writing my book, editing my book, getting it published, and now I'm promoting it and doing speaking. I really don't know what God has planned for me. For 20 years, I knew God wanted me to be a teacher, and I knew that's where He wanted me, and that's how He wanted to use me. And now I'm on a new chapter, and I don't know what His plans are. I'm waiting to see if He wants to use this book to encourage people and point people to Him. That's great. That would be my prayer. I'm not sure what doors He wants to open up, but I'm open and available to God, and we'll see what He's got planned for me.
Have you launched a ministry related to the book or to your efforts?
I have not. For right now, it's just the book, and I'm giving away copies and selling copies and sharing my story at schools and churches and clubs. And we'll see how God wants to use me and the book.
How do people reach you if they want to book you to come to their church? And are there people helping you get that message out?
There's a website, davidklineauthor.com, where there are links to Amazon for the book or iTunes, and they can also contact me for bookings.
All right, so I'm looking at the website now. So you have your background, how to order the book, any media and news coverage, and as well as a contact form so that people know how to get in touch with you to book you. You do have Facebook, a Facebook account. What is that address?
That's David Kline Author.
David Kline Author at Facebook. And your book is available at Amazon and Barnes & Noble as well, so they can find your book through both of those outlets. David, as you look out on a world that is pretty much gone in a direction which is troubling and worrisome to many of us, from a liberal, godless society, here you are confined to a wheelchair, and you have a message you want to deliver. If you could encapsulate that message into a couple of minutes, Would you do that for our audience and speak right to them and share that message that you have burning in your heart that prompted you to write the book, prompted you to tell your story? There's a message deep in there that's the core of your book, Walk by Faith. So would you speak really directly to our audience around the world about what that burning message is that's in your heart to share?
I think that message would be twofold. I have a real heart for the lost, people who don't know Jesus. And as I said, I'm so glad God got a hold of me as a young boy. I pray constantly for those around me. When I was teaching, I'd pray for my students. I really wish that everyone could know Jesus and his love and salvation and the peace that can bring to them. But my book also, I think, is geared to those who do have a relationship with God and who might just be struggling with certain pains or injuries or trials. Everyone goes through a trial. Not everyone's going to have a spinal cord injury, and I never want to diminish any struggle that someone's going through. I've had people tell me, oh, I have such a bad headache, and then they'll say, oh, but I can't complain. You're quadriplegic, and I think you can complain. Headaches hurt. Struggles are something we all go through, and I really, when I wrote my book, I really wanted people to be encouraged and to know that God is a loving God, and God is a big God, and he knows what we're going through. He knows what's coming down the road tomorrow, 5 years, 10 years. He just wants us to trust him and to have faith that his plans are bigger than our own. I really hope my book encourages that in people and bolsters their faith and points them to Jesus, knowing that he's a good God, and whatever we're going through, big or small, he'll get us through it. It just takes faith. We just need to hang on. So I think that's where my thought was when I wrote the book. It's a book that could be for athletes, because I was an athlete and all that was taken in an instant, and that happens to some people. My book could be for people who have disabilities and are struggling. But overall, I think it's for all of us, because we all go through struggles and we all need faith and we all need trust. And I think that's the direction I was heading with my book.
Do you believe everybody is as capable as you were in handling situations like this, in faith and trusting God and not going down the path of being angry or feeling like you're being punished or you're disciplined, or that God has dealt you a life-changing blow because he doesn't love you? This was a part of you. Do you believe that if people read this book, if people read their Bible, if people do have a relationship with God, that they can find hope even in despair, that they can find healing even in infirmity, that they can find joy even in the challenges that you face 24 hours a day, 7 days a week?
A number of people have told me, well, I could never do it, if I broke my neck. But we really don't know till we're there. It's not something we could really necessarily plan for. I am grateful that I had faith before this happened. I think that was certainly helpful. And I've known people with spinal cord injuries who have gone the opposite direction. They've given up or turned to drugs or alcohol and just thought, forget it, I can't do it. But I believe that God will give us faith if we ask him for it. He says he will. He says he'll provide for all our needs. And so I think it's sort of a mental choice. We have to really decide, am I going to trust God and believe, or am I not? It might be that simple, because if we trust God, he'll give us the faith if we ask him for it. And if we have the faith, then we can move day by day by day and continue to build on that. So it's got to be, I think, a choice. I think it's got to come down to each individual, what they believe and how they view God.
David, certainly you do not want to be defined by your disability. You want to be defined as a man of God, a child of God, and walking in the grace and glory of God. How do we help people understand that you're not disabled? You are a messenger. And maybe if you were wearing a jersey and have played for some great team, you might not be bringing this message, but God has chosen you for such a time as this to bring his message and to look at you as a messenger of God, not as a quadriplegic.
Well, yes, I don't want people to just see the wheelchair. I want them to see who I am and ideally what God's doing through me. And if God wants to use me just in a few individuals' lives, just those around me, that's fine. Not everyone is going to be a Billy Graham, and that's not part of God's plan. We all have ministries in our own homes, in our own neighborhoods and communities. So if God wants to use me through this book and reach many people, great. If he wants to use me and just in my circle, that's fine too. But I do want people to see me as someone who trusts God. And this whole time I've wanted to be viewed as a normal guy, not the wheelchair, but someone who teaches, someone who coaches, someone who has a life, and someone who loves God and is trusting God.
God's message has always been that man looks on the outward appearance, but God looks at the heart. And you are the living, breathing example of that as your heart for God shines through even in your time of tribulation, which is going to last you for the rest of your days. So I pray that you would wake up tomorrow morning and be completely healed. I pray that God will supernaturally touch you in a mighty way, but I also pray that he will anoint every word that comes from your mouth, that the words of your mouth and the meditations of your heart be acceptable to him, and that God would use you to reach those who understand that even in our despair, God is right there with us, ready to pull us out of it to be used for his good and his glory. David Kline, author of Walk by Faith, thank you so much for sharing your story with us here on Revealing the Truth.
Thank you, Eric. God bless.
God bless you. We're going to take a short break, and when we come back, we'll bring you the next edition of Revealing the Truth.